The Enhanced Games is a sports competition similar to the Olympics where athletes will compete in athletics, swimming, combat sports and much more, with one key difference. They will be allowed and even encouraged to take performance-enhancing drugs that are on the banned list of the World Anti-Doping Agency, or WADA. This means endurance athletes can be juiced full of EPO, powerlifters will be pumped with HGH, sprinters will be roided on testosterone supplements. So it's basically just the Olympic Games. The athletes will be subject to medical testing to ensure their use of PEDs is safe, as most of the drugs on the WADA ban list are there because they cause severe health problems. For instance, EPO, a drug that boosts endurance by increasing red blood cell count in athletes, has been heavily linked with heart issues in elite cyclists and runners. The Enhanced Games is being funded and run by a few venture capitalists, with Aron D Souza being the president and co-founder of the Games. It's planned to be a yearly event with the aim of making the first Enhanced Games to be in the second half of 2025. Locations and venues have yet to be announced. Now, regardless of whether this will actually go ahead, I want to discuss the message of the Enhanced Games, because what I want to make clear is that this is not just being marketed as an Olympic Games alternative. The founders are trying to build it as an anti-sports establishment movement, with its own philosophy that is highly critical of the IOC, International Olympic Committee, and the World Anti-Doping Agency. But what is their broader message? Does it have any weight to it? And will the success of the Enhanced Games result in the betterment of sports today? Let's get into it. The central claim of the Enhanced Games is that WADA has failed at their job and that many or even the majority of elite athletes are on steroids. Essentially, sports bodies need to cut the shit. We know that all of the elite athletes are on steroids, so let's stop pretending that they're all golden angels and that they're completely natural. The Enhanced Games, however, doesn't necessarily believe that it's a bad thing, and that being on steroids is actually something to be celebrated. They view PEDs as a feat of human engineering and a way to push the boundaries of sports, in the same way how we view new training methods or nutritional science as advancements in sports science. The problem to them is that usage of PEDs is seen as an inherently bad thing, which forces athletes to cover up their usage, resulting in there being a higher likelihood of athletes taking health risks from steroids. And it also creates a false idea that most of the elite athletes we see today are natural. Their solution is to be as open and honest about the PED usage of their athletes as possible, and change the narrative so that PEDs are inherently a negative thing. They even believe that it should be something to be celebrated. On their website, they talk about how athletes are brave for coming out about their PED usage, and that we need to mobilize to stop anti-science hate rhetoric speech on PEDs. What a mouthful. But they don't just take a moral stance on PEDs, they also look at the economic model of the Olympics, because this has been subject to huge criticism over the past few years. There have been tons of videos on YouTube in light of the Paris Olympics recently cropping up about the flawed IOC business model where host cities spend billions on stadiums and facilities to be used for 2 weeks and then abandoned once the games are done. And with all that money that goes into the Olympics, you would think the athletes are getting a good paycheck for making the event what it is. Nope, the athletes get zero money from the IOC, and it goes all on funding, developing the sport, and other stuff. The Enhanced Games has promised to pay athletes for attendance, including 6-figure sums for gold medal winners and $1 million for the first person to break the 100-meter world record and the 50-meter freestyle record, while still on steroids. They are also suggesting there won't be a host city for the games, but instead various hosts around the world for different events. So the boxing events could be held in Turkey, the swimming events in Australia, the athletics in England, and so on and so forth. This would mean the cost of the games is massively reduced because you don't need to build a dozen new facilities for a 2-week event, but instead just use the existing ones that the countries have built. The Olympics also seems to have some kind of obsession with adding tons of new random sports which require more and more facilities to be built. I mean, now people have got to build dance breaking studios and, I don't know, skateboard parks and everything because someone's decided that those are legitimate sports. No offense to all the skateboarders and breakdancers out there. Look, what you guys do is very impressive, but you can't convince me that breakdancing is a sport. And I think this critique of the economic model of the Olympic Games is one of the strongest parts of the Enhanced Games movement. Everyone agrees the IOC model is outdated and it doesn't allow for athletes to maximize their earnings and build their personal brands. You can find plenty of stories of elite athletes, Olympians doing side jobs such as delivery driving, or even having full-time careers to support themselves alongside their training, because they simply don't earn enough from their sporting career alone to be able to support themselves and their family. And think about how many athletes we're missing out on because they can't afford to miss work to train, as they need to make a living for themselves. It's a travesty that athletes aren't paid properly, and I think the Enhanced Games could even go further, giving them a proportion of the sponsorships that the Enhanced Games would get. Although many of the top athletes tend to have their own personal sponsorships with running shoe brands or whatever equipment is relevant to their sport, the Olympic Games has its own partners irrespective of the athletes, ironically with McDonald's and Coca-Cola being two of the main ones. And yet none of the earnings made from these sponsorships goes out to the athletes. They've even restricted the ability of athletes to gain sponsorships from other places, as shown by the infamous Rule 40, which heavily restricts athletes' ability to appear in promotions with other brands whilst the Olympic Games are happening. On another note, a huge benefit of having the Enhanced Games around the world in different facilities around the countries will mean that there's much less cost to host the Enhanced Games, and it means countries are going to be much more likely to want to bid for them. If the Enhanced Games were to get successful, they would get all of the tourism, job creation and notoriety that the Enhanced Games brings, but wouldn't need to spend tens of billions millions of pounds on building stadiums that are going to last for only 2 weeks. Another positive of the enhanced games is that I like the honesty about the prevalence of PEDs in the sport. It's one of these things that no one really speaks about but everyone knows. So many of these guys are on steroids and it casts a sort of black shadow over the entire sport. WADA commissioned a survey in 2012 which guaranteed anonymity to Olympic athletes. It found that 44% admitted to being on some banned PED in the last year. And consider the fact that that's just the people who said yes. When someone brings around an anonymous survey, you're always going to be suspicious of it, no matter how much of a guarantee you get. So I'm willing to bet that many athletes took PEDs and just didn't put their name down on the survey. And then consider the fact that the people who are on PEDs are likely going to be at the top level. So it's quite possible that a larger proportion than 44% of the top athletes are on PEDs. I'm talking your Usain Bolts, your Mo Farahs, the ones that are the real stars that people know about. And this prevalence needs to be addressed in some capacity because it makes it hard to respect and get invested in the sport, because every single breakout performance comes with legitimate concerns of PED usage. The 800 meters is a great example of that. We've seen huge breakout performances with many athletes coming within a second of the world record, and the only thing people can focus on, rightly so, is the fact that a lot of these athletes are probably on PEDs. Isn't it going to be funny when they finally start the enhanced games and then it turns out that no records are broken because nothing's changed? As a movement, I think the enhanced games definitely has some strong ideas, and it can act as a really good pressure group to the Olympics. However, I don't think it should be a replacement for the Olympic Games, because we need to consider the implications of what having an enhanced games would mean. For one, I think there's a risk of glamorizing PED usage. Whilst they're very clear that they're going to have health testing to ensure that they aren't endangering the health of the athlete, exposing people to PED usage is going to cause some serious issues. We're seeing this already with the rise of bodybuilding on social media. Body dysmorphia is going up crazily in young men. I think the rate of body dysmorphia in young men is actually starting to outstrip that of young women, which has been largely accredited to the gym movement online, which has seen a lot of fake naturals and even people who are very open to being on steroids, setting the idea of what a realistic body standard should be like. For instance, No Diesel is a very popular bodybuilder and content creator, and he's very open about his PED usage. Much as I respect that he's open about his PED usage, you can still argue that he's contributing to warping the perception of what a realistic body standard is for men. Now imagine if we put that on the world stage and made it an international competition, and you'd have the same issue. Then you've got to think about it in a more sinister light, because most of these athletes have been training since they were very young and early teenagers or even younger. So are coaches and countries now going to be encouraged to give younger athletes PED usage when they don't know the effects of them, and the athletes are too young to really make an informed decision about whether they want to do this? Given the whole state-sponsored doping allegations we've seen with certain countries, I really don't like the way that could go. A less sinister criticism I have as well is that the enhanced games takes itself very seriously. I mentioned earlier about what they call anti-science hate rhetoric speech on PEDs. If you go onto the website, they start talking about how saying stuff like doping is apparently an inflammatory and disgusting word, or how people unfairly criticize athletes who come out about their PED usage. But from my experience, I don't think that people care about whether someone's using PEDs. They care about people who lie about use of PEDs. People aren't angry at the Liver King because he took steroids. People are angry at him because it was so obvious that he was on steroids, but he still claimed to be natural. No Diesel, the bodybuilder that I mentioned earlier, is a perfect example because he has a very loyal following and is generally disliked by very few people in the bodybuilding community, despite being very open about his steroid use. The fact that he's so open is what makes people like him. They don't care about the fact that he's on PEDs, because he's not trying to fool anyone into thinking that he's achieved his physique naturally. I think something we also need to keep in mind is that this is a business venture by a bunch of filthy rich venture capitalists. Although they may have plenty of passion in the project that they're pursuing, it's ultimately a way of making more money for them. And I think we should be mindful of what their intentions are when it comes to this project. If this games actually does go ahead, I do think they will see success, and I'd personally be interested to tune in. It'll be very interesting to see the limits that can be pushed when people take PEDs. I think the enhanced games can act as a really good pressure group, and it can highlight wider corruption and incompetency, and highlight also the failed model of the IOC, and pressure them to change. If we see a few of the enhanced games actually happen, and then countries start bidding for it and it's a huge success, then I think it's going to put pressure on the Olympic Games to start actually making some changes. Because at a certain point, athletes are going to be looking at the huge prize pools in the enhanced games, and then go to the Olympics and thinking, why am I busting my ass for literally £0 of prize money when these guys are making six-figure sums for getting bronze, silver and gold medals? But whilst I think they can act as a good pressure group, I don't think that it should be an Olympic Games replacement. The solution to WADA and IOC corruption isn't to make everyone take steroids. The solution is to implement actually effective testing and an actually effective business model, which is easier said than done, but it's something that's worth pursuing. Because the Olympic Games brings us truly special moments every time it's on. But these days it's getting more and more shrouded in the fact that most of these athletes are probably taking steroids. If you want to find out how and why elite athletes take steroids, then click on this video here. I hope you enjoyed the video, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy training.